Okay, so spiral dynamics. 8 stages of development, um, each one becoming more complex. And I like to see it like this, and it doesn't just apply to spiral dynamics, but as a sociologist, um, if there is an evolution of society, of culture and society and technology over time, technology is empirically observable, but cultural evolution, that's harder to observe. So one framework that you might arguably be able to say is usable across all cultures and societies is the degree of awareness a society has of other societies, how ethnocentric a society is in relation to others, um, is usually a marker for I guess your general actually it's a marker for the later stages of development because societies that become more world centric tend to become more peaceful and not necessarily scientific in the Western sense, but just more aware of the world as it is, and generally morally similar to the way we are right now. Um, but I may want to say that perhaps earlier societies, it's not as much like that. As different types of awareness. For instance, when we were first beginning to emerge in concept, culture, complex culture and society, it wasn't so much of being aware of the rest of the world, but becoming aware of ourselves and how we think. And it's basically crawling up out through nature and becoming more aware of nature and our relation of ourselves to it. And that's taken a long time. So these have generally been mapped out as instinctual, egocentric, ethnocentric, and then world centric. And if you see this as a spectrum, there are degrees that they kind of mix together, and then sometimes they go back due to certain events. There are so many variables here. It's difficult to talk about this, but I think a key navigator for this is the degree of what degree is this society self aware. Um, do they kill? Do they have mass genocide? Do they have slavery? To what degree are they aware of other human beings and the environment around them? If you find a very balanced society that has um, that is not necessarily all peaceful, but is more peaceful than other societies, that is not rejective of other cultures as much, and that is not what's it called? Not as well, doesn't enslave people. Uh, People who are societies that have are more sensitive about how they construct their own ideologies. So it's really a form of self awareness, and even at an individual level, societies have the same sort of thing. I mean, people have the same sort of thing. A psychologically developed person is not better than a non psychologically developed person, but by being aware of their own neurologies and their pathologies, not necessarily harping on them, but being aware of them and taking care of them as they must, they are able to live in better harmony with the rest of the world. So, a society that is aware of its own collective pathologies, for instance, justifying slavery, etc., society that is more aware of that is able to take care of it better than a society that is completely blissfully ignorant of that and justifies it in the opposite direction. For instance, eugenics or well, mostly eugenics in the early 20th century. You have Australian Aborigines being seen as evolutionarily inferior to white people, so they must be bred out. Things like that are obviously ridiculous and have no grounding in science. Not only that, but these people were human beings equal to us. So it's not that there are lesser human beings or greater human beings, but the human beings who exist, there's a degree of which they are aware of other people and are more understanding of how um, the artificiality of cultures and boundaries. The more you're aware of how you kind of set them up, the less real and the less important they become, and then you can sort of create a more global picture. And in a world that's shrinking continuously and becoming smaller and smaller, it's harder to be as ethnocentric as it once was. Conflict is increasing because old world ideologies where we have the space to be ethnocentric no longer exist. So we need to become more world centric. And I think that demand to become world centric is an evolutionary catalyst in a way. It's forcing people to confront their demons, because there's plenty of war going on right now in the world, and the world's shrinking, and it doesn't mean that it's going to mean either we're going to fight more, or we're going to start to have to learn to get along with each other. Um, in that sense, it's not necessarily ideological. It makes sense because we're facing a problem that once wasn't a problem. Ethnocentrism used to be good in a way. Ethnocentrism used to be the way societies operated, is how societies were formed in the first place. There are a new and more complex way of seeing the world, and because of that, we can sort of see a degree of a spectrum of how societies become more complex over time, and spiral dynamics in particular is one of these ways to map that out. I don't know if this would necessarily be used in sociological circles. I would recommend the usage of it, but it can't be the sole usage, because, for instance, they're all each level is a color, and each color represents a certain degree of awareness, of some kind of new emergence, some kind of new development in human consciousness of that society overall. And, well, I mean, they're all colors, so it just sounds very metaphysical. For instance, blue means mythic, orange means rational, green means sensitive, relativistic, yellow means integral, and, well, yellow means integrating, and then turquoise means integral. And there's first and second tier. Up to green is first tier, and then yellow and on are the last two of the 8 are second tier. Second tier is different than first tier because the second tier is able to see this. It has that degree of self-awareness that it can be like, well, my perspective is not the end-all be-all. We each have had, I mean, green says that too. See what I mean? You sort of get lost in the lingo. But all it's really saying is, over time, societies become more complex. They become aware of how they form and formulate boundaries, artificial boundaries around each other, each other's countries and people, just like individuals form boundaries and defenses around themselves, which were necessary at earlier stages of their own growth, but are now getting in the way of actually relating to other people. Societies as a whole have the same problem, and how societies interact and manage that problem is the degree of what stage of development they're at. And these are very general stages. They're not necessarily very, you can't reduce and simplify people down to one thing or the other. But they're a way to sort of navigate the bigger picture without losing the relativism that is very important as well, and understanding different people. So that's spiral dynamics. And let's see, what else? I think Aquil, which is the one I was showing you before, Aquil and spiral dynamics are the two things that I got out of Wilbur. This thing. Aquil and spiral dynamics. Aquil's great because it's a nice little map, but it's a little too boxy. Spiral dynamics is great, but it's a little too lingo-y. You know, you have blue, orange, red, and all these other colors, and if you talk to somebody about that, they may not even know what you're talking about, unless you have to explain the whole thing to them. So I think if we want integral, which is real science, it's able to observe these general tendencies, these underlying meanings in things, and sort of see how we're evolving still as a culture, as a species, individually, we're all growing. We have a tendency to become more complex and more self-aware over time. So in order to sort of manage all of this, I mean, Wilbur's done some great work, but I think it's very important for everyday people and people from all different fields, if they actually agree with Wilbur's work and they want to see this stuff actually getting things done and actually influencing respective fields, you have to take the language and the understanding, the underlying meanings in integral, this is an integral act in itself, I guess. You have to take the underlying meanings in integral theory and apply them to your specific field. So let's say, like me, I'm a sociologist. I need to apply what Wilbur's saying in a way that sociology will understand, and in a way that will really hit home. I mean, if these are truths about reality, about society, then they must work even without Ken Wilber's language, which is very important. Okay, I'll talk about this in a future video.